She didn't wear an expensive dress or shiny jewelry, just a simple uniform and a steady look. In the room decorated with luxury and fake smiles, she was invisible to some and uncomfortable to others. When he tripped, they laughed. When he tried to follow, they scoffed. They thought she was just another servant, just another black girl out of place, but no one there knew who she really was. And what was about to happen at that party would change everything. Before we continue this story, that will give you goosebumps. Tell me, where are you watching it from now? Right here in the comments. It's incredible to see how far stories of overcoming injustice can go. If you also believe that no one should be judged by their appearance, leave your like right now. This helps this message reach even more people. Subscribe to the channel to follow stories that inspire, move, and make us reflect. And it stays until the end, because the revelation of this story will silence an entire room. It was a golden afternoon in the southern United States. The ones where the sky looks hand-painted and everything seems too perfect to be real. Inside the Holloway mansion, preparation for the wedding of the family heiress was a spectacle in itself. White carpets, tables covered with almost exaggerated floral arrangements, waiters trained in absolute silence. Everything looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Guests arrived in imported cars, dressed in designer clothes and adorned with that air of someone who believes that the world revolves around their own surname. It was a meeting of important, rich and white people, and each one carried, albeit in disguise, the certainty of belonging. The type of environment where any non-standard presence becomes a reason for whispering. Among the professionals hired, there was her, a black woman, young, discreet, with a black uniform and white apron, her hair tied back tightly and a posture that oozed elegance, but that no one there seemed to notice, or rather, they didn't want to notice. Her name was Elena, and in the eyes of the elite present, she was just another employee, someone who should move silently, without being seen, without taking up space, someone who shouldn't exist beyond the role he was given. But there was something about Elena that bothered her. It wasn't the restrained beauty, nor the impeccable posture. It was the look. Firm, gift, pay attention. She didn't have her head down. He didn't tremble at the screams of the ceremonial team, and don't automatically smile at any pseudo-funny comments from guests. She was there for a reason, and even without saying a word, it bothered me. During preparations, she was moved to serve in the main wing. A strange choice, as newcomers normally stayed in areas with less visibility. But maybe someone already knew. Maybe someone already wanted to test it. On the other side of the room, the bride was taking photos with her parents. The father seemed distant. The mother, the controller, checked everything. The height of the arrangements, the position of the cutlery, the level of shine on the floor. And when he looked to the corner of the room and saw Elena serving glasses, he frowned. Small, almost imperceptible. But Elena saw it, and he understood. That look wasn't like someone who noticed an employee. It was from someone who felt an aesthetic error, a body outside the party standard, a color outside the family palette. Elena continued serving. She didn't need to fit in. She knew exactly where she was, and much more important, he knew who he was. But the others, no. Yet, the sound of the cutlery lightly hitting the china plates was almost hypnotic. Stuffed conversations, rehearsed laughter, and looks that measured the value of the guests more than their real stories. For those who don't belong, that environment was meant to be intimidating. But Elena was not like the other employees, and that was starting to get annoying. She moved with disconcerting precision. He knew exactly when to collect the glasses, change the wine, adjust the napkin next to the plate without the guest even noticing. His presence was soft but firm, invisible but present, and this contrast caused discomfort in those who were used to being served with submission and empty smiles. The first to notice was Margaret Holloway, mother of the bride, a woman used to controlling everything, including what she considers acceptable around her. He watched Elena for minutes, first with strangeness, then with something worse, discomfort. She discreetly leaned into her sister's ear. "Who put this one in the main wing? It doesn't fit in with the environment. It seems out of place. Too much." The sister laughed. The mother-in-law listened, and the comment, although whispered, spread across the tables like bitter perfume. Suddenly, everyone started to notice Elena, but not because of his flaws, but because of his posture, for not laughing, for not bowing, for having a beauty that there seemed out of place. And nothing bothers an elitist group more than a black woman occupying space with dignity. The surrounding waiters noticed. One of them, visibly young, whispered to her as he handed her the tray, "You should try to look less, impressive." Elena looked at him calmly. Impressive or threatening? He smiled nervously. He didn't respond. Gone away. The party continued, and with it, the looks. Some curious, others are envious, but the worst were the ones that came from the Holloway family table. Eyes that didn't see her as a professional, but as a scenario error, an uncomfortable reminder that not everyone there was molded in the same way. In the outer area, while the musicians tuned their instruments and the photographers positioned their flashes, Elena collected glasses and thought in silence. I had felt this kind of rejection before, but there was something different now. It wasn't just contempt, it was fear disguised as superiority. And she knew, when the elite begins to fear the presence of someone they cannot control, it is because they are about to truly lose control. The hall was now full. Dim lights, lit candles, glasses clinking to the rhythm of arrogance. On the microphone, the master of ceremonies announced enthusiastically, "Dinner time." The guests went to their tables with slow steps, laughing at unfunny jokes, holding their own glasses like invisible trophies. Everything seemed perfect to the eyes of those who live behind golden curtains. And then, Elena passed by. He carried a tray with 4 glasses of red wine with the same precise balance as always. Looking forward, the firm steps. But it was there, in the middle of the room, that it all began. One of the bride's bridesmaids, a young blonde woman drunk on power and champagne, discreetly stretched out her foot just as Elena passed by. The stumble was inevitable. The tray tilted. The wine flew. 2 glasses shattered on the floor, and one of them fell straight onto the mother-in-law's dress. The hall froze. The sound of crystal breaking was followed by an oppressive silence. All eyes turned to her. Elena standing motionless, with her eyes fixed on the red stain on the expensive fabric of the woman who least tolerated her presence. "But what is this?" Margaret shouted, in a sharp, theatrical tone, with one hand on her dress and the other pointing at Elena. "You can't even serve a drink without causing a scene?" Elena breathed. He didn't apologize immediately. He didn't even defend himself. The tragedy was not hers. She knew that. But there, no truth mattered. The godmother who caused the stumble looked to the side, pretending not to understand. Other guests laughed discreetly. A man whispered, "That's why these types of people shouldn't be so close to the main tables." The owner of the catering company ran up to her, apologized to the guests, and pulled Elena aside. "What were you thinking? Are you going to ruin the judge's daughter's wedding with a disaster like that?" I tripped. Tripped? Or provoked? Because it looks like you got distracted, and now there are people wanting your head in here. Elena was silent, because she already knew. When they want to take you down, even your breathing becomes a reason for attack. Returning backstage, he dried his uniform. There was no crying, no visible anger, just a thought. They want to erase me in the dark, but I was made to bother even shining in. The silence. At the main table, where the elite sat as if the world were their private backyard, the atmosphere was strange. The laughs, which had previously been loose, were now contained. The nasty comments that normally echoed guiltlessly now had a bitter weight. The groom, Daniel Prescott, was restless. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, impeccable hair, and a trained smile. But his eyes betrayed something. They weren't where they were supposed to be. From the moment Elena stumbled, Daniel could no longer concentrate. He saw everything, not just the fall, but the godmother's subtle movement, the foot stretched, the mocking smile, and, most of all, Elena's look when she stood up. It wasn't a guilty look. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what was happening and had decided not to beg. That disarmed him. While the guests resumed their toasts, pretending that everything had returned to normal, Daniel kept his gaze fixed in the direction of the kitchen, as if behind those doors there was something more important than the marriage itself. The bride sitting next to him noticed his discomfort. What it was? He asked, in a low but firm voice. "Nothing." he replied, looking away. But that was all. He remembered. He knew. And I didn't understand how the situation had gotten out of control so quickly. In his head, images from another time came back. Another place. Elena, in a white coat, saving a life with steady hands and a tireless soul. And now that same woman being treated like dirt in front of people who thought they owned the world because they wore silver cutlery and embroidered dresses. This was unbearable. But Daniel knew what would happen if he spoke now. He would be accused of exaggerating, to ruin the moment, of giving too much importance to a waitress. Then he fell silent. For now. But the tension between him and his fiancée increased by the minute. She smiled too much. I pretended not to know. Maybe he knew. Maybe he never cared. And that's when Daniel began to see what really surrounded him. It wasn't just the arrogance of the bride's family. It was the normalization of cruelty, the pleasure of diminishing those who don't belong. And at the same time, Elena continued to work. Discreet, serena, but with the dignity of someone who, even when injured, remains upright. Daniel knew what he did in the next few hours would define much more than the future of the marriage. It would define who he was. If you believe that there are times when silence is more important than shouting, and that taking sides is a matter of character, not occasion, comment here. I choose courage when the world chooses silence. I want to know who here has felt the discomfort of someone who needs to decide between what's right and what's easy. Dinner progressed slowly, as if the time there had been stretched out just to keep the rich comfortable. Crystal glasses, elaborate dishes, exaggerated praise for a menu that no one knew how to pronounce. Everything was pose. And in the middle of the farce, Elena was still going, serving, cleaning, observing. But now she wasn't just the waitress. She was the center of the whispers, unauthorized distraction, the discomfort that many tried to hide with hard smiles and short laughs. It was then that Margaret Holloway, mother of the bride, decided to resolve the situation in her own way. Elena called with a dry gesture. All eyes at the head table turned to the scene. "You can come here, darling." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret smiled, a slippery, poisonous smile. "We want to toast, and I think you would be perfect to personally serve the bride and groom's table. After all, you're already so in the spotlight tonight, aren't you?" Elena was silent for a second. He looked at the other faces. She saw the sparkle in the bridesmaid's eyes, the tension in the groom's shoulders, the mockery hidden in the guest's restrained breathing. I knew what that was. It wasn't a kindness. It was a trap, a spectacle planned with malice. But she nodded. He took the bottle, and it was. His steps to the head table were like muffled drumbeats. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Elena poured each glass with the same precision as always. But Margaret was not satisfied. "Since you're here, say a few words. Say how happy you are to be part of something so great." The hall fell into an aggressive silence. That was it. They wanted to force her to say thank you. They wanted her to bow, to say in front of everyone that she felt honored to be there, even though she was treated like nothing. Elena breathed. He held the bottle firmly, and then, in a calm voice, he replied, "I don't usually give speeches while I work, but I appreciate the invitation." And he looked directly at Margaret. No fear, no tremor. It's always curious to see how luxury sometimes hides so much poverty of spirit. Some choked. Others lowered their eyes. Margaret tried to laugh, but it was a dry laugh. Empty. Elena bowed her head slightly, like an elegant curtsy, and he withdrew. The hall was now divided. Some admired in silence. Others were boiling inside. But everyone felt like something was changing. The atmosphere in the hall had changed. There was still music. There were still warm lights and glasses being raised. But nothing felt as comfortable as before. Elena's words, spoken elegantly, had ignited a spark. And every time a spark ignites in a place made of flammable ego, someone tries to put it out with fire. Margaret, embarrassed and furious, tried to contain her expression, disguising her humiliation with hurried sips of wine. The bride whispered nervously to the officiant, trying to regain control of the ceremony. The groom, Daniel, kept his gaze fixed on the glass and on his thoughts. It was then that Walter, one of the bride's uncles, stood up to toast. A tall man, artificially tanned, with the voice of someone who is used to being heard even when he has nothing to say. "I want to propose a toast to the Holloway family," he said, raising his glass. "For good taste, for elegance, and for maintaining tradition in a time where anyone thinks they can be part of everything." Some smiled, others tensed. "And of course," Walter continued, now pointing lightly towards the corner of the room where Elena was organizing glasses, "a special toast to those who serve with such professionalism." The pause was on purpose. And then came the blow. "Ultimately, it's always good to remember, everyone has their place, right? She should be cleaning the floor, not serving at the altar." The sentence cut the air like a razor. And this time, no one laughed. There was silence. Heavy, dense. Some people coughed. Others lowered their eyes. But no one confronted him. Elena listened. "Of course you heard." But he didn't turn around. He continued collecting glasses, as if they hadn't said anything, as if that phrase was already part of the furniture in your life. But Daniel couldn't do it. Blood rose like a wave. There was no more pretending. There was no more silence. He looked at Walter, then to the table, then to Elena, and he felt a knot in his stomach, of shame, of impotence, of regret for taking so long. The ceremony could not continue like this, because it wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a crime disguised as a party. The entire hall seemed frozen. Walter's toast still echoed in the air, like an offense that refuses to die. And, even among those who laughed inside, there was a discomfort in their eyes, like someone who knows something has gone too far, but doesn't have the courage to stand up first, until Daniel moved. Slowly but decisively, he placed the glass firmly on the table and stood up. The guests, surprised, fell silent. The bride touched his arm. "Baby, what are you doing?" But he didn't respond. He took 2 steps forward. He took the microphone left by the master of ceremonies, and with a firm voice he faced the entire room. "I wanted to say a few words." The silence thickened. Margaret crossed her arms. Walter smiled, still intoxicated by his own cruelty. And Elena stopped, but he didn't run away, just watched. Daniel took a deep breath. This night was planned to be unforgettable, but because of everything that happened, it already is. Because what I saw here today wasn't just a wedding. It was a portrait. An ugly portrait. Cruel. A portrait of someone who still believes someone just because they wear an expensive suit and carry a pedigree surname. The first reactions came. Whispering, discomfort. But he continued. "You humiliated a woman. A professional. And more than that, you mocked someone who carries more dignity in their eyes than many people here have on their resumes." Margaret tried to intervene. "Daniel, this is not the time for this." But he raised his hand. "It's exactly time. Because you don't know who she is, right? They think she's just the waitress." He looked at Elena. "But that woman there saved me. Literally. She was my mentor in a volunteer project when I was lost, about to abandon everything. She was the one who guided me when no one else believed in me. She not only rescued me, she inspired me. She is a teacher, researcher, and one of the most brilliant minds I have ever met." The hall was in shock. I asked her to be here today, not as an employee, but as a guest of honor. She only agreed to help with the buffet, so as not to embarrass me with a last-minute cancellation. And what did you do? They laughed, they mocked, they pushed, just because they had no idea who she was. He turned to Walter. "And you should leave this room now." Silence became a sentence. Walter put down the cup and left, embarrassed. Elena, still standing still, but with teary eyes, not from weakness, but relief. The hall, little by little, rose to its feet. First timid applause, then firm palms, and then everyone stood up. Daniel, not by, but for her. Elena. The atmosphere in the room was no longer the same. The tables seemed too small for the weight of the embarrassment. The jewelry shined less. The smiles were broken, and the eyes that once despised her now sought her with discomfort. But Elena didn't run. She remained standing, firm, as if that had been her place all along. And it was. Daniel still held the microphone, but now his eyes were focused solely on her. "Elena, do you want to say something?" She hesitated for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and walked to the center of the room. There was no longer any need to disguise. She didn't need to be discreet. She was finally seen. He took the microphone delicately. He looked at everyone, and it began. I didn't come here to teach. I didn't come here to be an example or a martyr. I came because I was invited by someone I truly consider, and I agreed to help when the unexpected happened, because I thought that, even though I was invisible, I could, contribute in some way. He paused. He looked into Margaret's eyes, then at the bridesmaids, then into the void. I am Elena Baptiste, sociology professor at a community university, speaker on social justice, and founder of a project that offers free education to at-risk young people. The silence was absolute, but now, full of shame. I've been to much more hostile places than this. I've faced rooms full of people who looked at me as if I didn't exist, but nothing compares to the coldness of a fake smile followed by contempt. She looked around. And you know what's most curious? It's just that even with all the titles, all the fights, all the books, one uniform was enough for you to decide that I was less than. A murmur cut through the air, but no one dared to speak out loud. I don't hold anger, she said firmly, because anger consumes. But I remember, and I will remember every crossed look, every whispered joke, every glass that fell on purpose to make me trip. And I will also remember who stood up. She turned to Daniel. The two exchanged a look full of respect and truth. Not everyone here attacked me. Some just remained silent, and the silence is also heavy. Elena handed over the microphone. He returned to the place where the trays were before, and it stopped. There were no more trays, no orders, just her, entire. When Elena finished speaking, there was no immediate applause, not because the audience didn't want it, but because no one knew how to applaud after seeing themselves in the mirror of that speech. Margaret Holloway remained seated, her body stiff, her hands trembling in her lap, and her eyes lost in some spot on the wall. The woman who coordinated buffets, criticized floral arrangements, and dictated the tone of dresses now couldn't control her own breathing. The bridesmaids, previously loud and smiling, whispered among themselves, looking away every time Elena passed by. Some tried to laugh nervously, as if they wanted to sweep their shame under the linen tablecloth. But it was too late. The guests knew. Every minute someone whispered the name Elena Baptiste respectfully, and soon cell phones started vibrating. Messages, searches, videos. Someone had started filming. Her speech was already circulating. On the internet, the first comments appeared. Black waitress is humiliated, but responds with class and exposes hypocrisy at elite wedding. Teacher treated like a servant teaches a lesson without raising her voice. And inside that room that previously overflowed with superiority, now discomfort reigned. Daniel returned to his seat. The bride, in shock, pulled her arm. You did this, in front of everyone. I did what was right, he replied coldly. You ruined everything. No, I stopped us from pretending that this was beautiful. She got up, left the table, and disappeared behind the curtains. Some bridesmaids followed her. Other guests began to leave, and those who stayed knew there was no more party. There was a lesson. Margaret got up with difficulty, walked to Elena, and with a bitter mouth murmured, You should have warned me. Elena smiled with her eyes, and you should have respected it, even without warning. The woman did not respond. It just came out. And now, Elena remained there, in the same place where, hours before, she was tripped. But now, no one dared to touch her, because every party has a narrative. But some, like this one, become history. The hall was almost empty. The arrangements were still intact. The bowls on the tables still reflected the soft lights of the chandeliers. But the climate was different. There was no more party. There were no more masks. Only the truth, suspended in the air, like a perfume that didn't dissipate. Elena walked slowly between the tables, now without a tray, without a uniform, just her, whole, clean, silent. One of the buffet staff tried to give him back his apron, looking downcast. You don't need it anymore, said Elena, gently. You can stay. Her words didn't come in anger. They carried no grudges. They carried something much more powerful, peace. A peace of someone who was treated as invisible and chose not to disappear. A peace that doesn't scream, don't humiliate, but it teaches, with every step. Outside, Daniel was waiting for her. Are you leaving without saying goodbye? He asked, with an almost childish smile. I've already said everything I needed to say, Elena replied. What you did here today was more important than any alliance. She looked into his eyes. What I did was just exist. The rest you did to me. He nodded, and he knew that woman had more strength in a calm look than many leaders in fiery speeches. Before leaving, Elena passed some guests who were still outside. Some tried to justify themselves. Others just made room for her to pass. No one else dared to look down. And then she got into her simple car. No escort, not highlighted, and he left. But he left something behind that no one could ever ignore. She left the discomfort. He left the reflection. And he left, above all, the mirror. Because everyone there at some point would need to look at each other and ask yourself, would I have done it differently? That night it wasn't Elena who came out smaller. It was the party. It was prejudice. It was the system disguised as etiquette. And as she walked away from that mansion, with the night wind beating against the glass, Elena knew. She didn't need to scream. He didn't need to avenge. He just needed to be who he always was. If this story touched you, comment here. I choose to be a light where people try to put me out. I want to know who stayed until the end and felt Elena's silent strength firsthand. Leave a like right now. It helps this video reach more people who need to hear this message. Subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that inspire, confront injustice, and show that character always wins over appearance. And don't leave without watching the next video that's already appearing on the screen, because the next story could be even more impactful than this one.